Indian cultures were very focused on this volume-driven mentality.
A 6-month-old baby has a lot of protective mechanisms that keep them safe as they explore food that will actually start to fade out to a certain extent over time.
There's this idea that the bigger the piece of food, the worse it is. In reality, when we think about what's going on in our throat, it's actually the opposite.
What about when they actually take a big bite? I'm terrified. I don't think this is a good idea. I'm not sure I can do it. Let's go back to the spoon.
Biting and spitting is natural, like Kary had said, because they don't really know exactly what to do with it yet, but they learn what to do through trial and error.
Baby has so much more internal motivation to eat that food in time if you give them the chance to explore it at their own pace and build those skills at the pace that is right for them.
So if they're sitting at the table and they're engaging with the food, whether that's 1 minute, 5 minutes, or heck, 35 minutes, that meal is a win.
You absolutely do not have to stick with the same food day after day.
That 6 to 8 month window is the time where your baby is the most open to learning about these flavors.
Sometimes it's not that baby is completely done, it's that they don't know what to do next.
Hey parents, welcome to another episode of the Modern Indian Parent Podcast, a podcast that is redefining parenting in Indian families. I'm Sanchita Daswani, a pediatric nutritionist, and every week we bring you episodes where we're helping you own your modern parenting choices, even if Nani and Dadi don't agree with them. Speaking of families not agreeing with our parenting choices, today's topic is going to be about a type of feeding approach, which is baby-led weaning. I know so many parents out there, they really want to embrace baby-led weaning because they want to do the best for their kids and they want them to be in control of meal times. Unfortunately, today in so many Indian families, adopting baby-led weaning really seems to be tough. There are so many barriers around us. First of all, people around us not accepting it or understanding it. Number two, being surrounded by a volume-driven culture where the focus is so much on quantities and how much we're having. And the third thing is that fear of choking, gagging, and not knowing how to offer foods, when to offer foods. It is a very overwhelming time for us as parents. In today's episode, we are here to clarify all that confusion parents have to help them feel more confident to adopt a baby-led weaning approach when starting solids or even for your toddler. Everyone who has started solids would have heard of Solid Starts. They are an evidence-based and science-backed resource for parents who are navigating introducing solid food to their babies and toddlers. They have the biggest first food database out there. They have an app, a website, and book. If there's any food you want to know how to introduce, you will find it on Solid Starts. In today's episode, we are joined with Kary and Kimberly, who are both senior members of Solid Starts. Both of them are pediatric occupational therapists with over 15 years of experience. They are also feeding and swallowing specialists. So they will be joining us on the podcast to help us clarify all our doubts and make us feel confident when it comes to starting solids and in general meal times with our kids. Their courses serve as the foundation for Solid Starts and its pediatric community around the world. So let's welcome them to the podcast.
Hey parents, welcome to another episode of the Modern Indian Parent Podcast. We are joined by Kim and Kary. Thank you guys for being here today. How are you guys doing?
Thank you so much for having us. We're doing well.
I'm so excited to be here.
So today we're here to talk about such an important topic, which is baby-led weaning and nutrition for our kids and all things meal times. I think it's one of the most stressful times for parents. And I think just Solid Starts and the work that both of you do has really helped bring some confidence and ease for all of us parents that we can actually offer variety. Meal times can be fun and it can be nutritious for our kids as well. So just to get started, would love to know a little bit about both your journeys and how you got this passion and interest about nutrition for kids and starting solids.
I am a pediatric occupational therapist by training, and Kary was actually one of my first ever mentors at Children's Hospital Los Angeles years and years and years ago. And I think that we both got interested in feeding because it was so integral to every single person's life. Every child's relationship with their family revolves around eating. Every special event in their life revolves around food and eating. And when you work with hospitalized kids, you realize that they're missing out on this piece of really special connection with their family. And so one thing led to another, and we started working with a lot of children in the hospital with eating issues, babies in the hospital with eating issues. And Kary can tell this story, but she got exposed to baby-led weaning, or starting with finger foods, through some family connections of her own. And we figured, if this is working so well with typically developing kids, why can't we use these same strategies in the hospital with kids that are really struggling? So we, of course, did our homework and started digging deep and looking at the research on choking and on swallowing in relationship to chewing. And believe it or not, there's really no reason to not introduce food in this way from a safety perspective. And so we started a couple different programs in the hospital to introduce foods like this to medically fragile kids. And we saw really beautiful results with nurses and doctors and families so amazed at the difference in how these kids were participating around food. So that kind of got us started loving this topic in general. And one thing led to another, and we started teaching other professionals about these topics. And through doing that, we ended up on Instagram and just talking about our courses. And one thing led to another, and we ended up connected with Jenny Best and Solid Starts, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, and our paths are very similar, so I won't go into all the detail of my history, but where we diverge a little bit, or some of the differences along the way, are just I worked for a few years prior to Children's LA in an outpatient clinic with children who had severe picky eating and a lot of developmental delay. I also myself was a picky eater as a kid, to the point that I threw up at the dinner table sometimes. I was definitely very fussy about what I would eat. And that topic just sort of quickly became something that was near and dear to my heart. I could see how much it caused kids to struggle. I could also see how significantly it impacted parents and the family. And when I started working with younger and younger kids, so instead of a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old, it suddenly became 12-month-olds, I could see the patterns of how people got to where they were at 3, 4, and 5, which were patterns that were really hard to walk back and to undo. So I found the idea of baby-led weaning randomly through a cousin years and years ago. So this was close to 15 years ago now. Actually, maybe it was 15 years ago. And started using it with family members and friends. And like Kim said, then realized, oh, this is a piece that is missing at the 6-month mark, 12-month mark, that could be helping some of these things that I'm seeing in 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, skills that are missing, chewing skills, for example, that hadn't quite developed, a difficulty progressing off of purees and away from spoon feeding towards self-feeding and chewable foods. All of those things, I could see this sort of upstream approach improving the outcomes for these kids, and started using it with that. And then Kim and I both implemented this in the hospital, like she said, and we're like, oh, this works for a wide variety of children. And it sort of became a tool that was really essential in our toolbox.
Yeah. And when it comes to baby-led weaning, this whole concept of it, could you define for us what actually is baby-led weaning? Because, so many times when we talk to people, it seems to be a very new concept. Like everyone says, oh, it's that fad or a trend, it's something new. But is it something that we've kind of been doing, or we didn't realize, or is it actually a new concept? And what is it actually?
Yeah, it's definitely, as a term that is coined, it is around, I think, 16 or 17 years old, coined by Jill Rapley, who is a nurse in the UK. But it is not a new concept in terms of its use. This is how people fed babies prior to the industrialization of baby food, where we have machines that can now produce foods that are very well mashed and pureed. And there was a pretty significant change in when babies were fed because of that, partly because of the machines being able to create these thin, watery purees, but also because of the invention of formula and the movement away from breastfeeding that happened early on in the 90s. There was a lot of things that sort of came together to push people away from more traditional methods of feeding babies, which actually look a lot like baby-led weaning if you go back. So the term that was coined in the last 15 years or 20 years, yes, it is newer, and so it feels perhaps like a fad or like it's something that is passing, but it's based on concepts that go back millennia.
And there's a lot of chatter out there about what baby-led weaning is and what it isn't. And there's baby-led weaning police on the internet that are telling you you're doing it right or wrong, when The true belief or the true theory behind baby-led weaning is to just let your baby take the lead with their feeding experiences. So when we think about all of the other things our babies do, whether that is learning to roll, learning to sit by themselves, learning to pull to stand, we let them figure it out on their own through trial and error. Even with breast and bottle feeding, we offer the breast, we offer the bottle, we let the baby communicate that they're interested and they eat. But for some reason, when it comes to solid foods, the Industrial Revolution, or historically in the last 100 years, has created this idea in parents that we need to control this specific developmental step for babies. And there's really no reason why we do. So the idea behind baby-led weaning is not necessarily about the kind of food you offer. It's just let's let baby take the lead in feeding themselves. They are developmentally ready to feed themselves. And that doesn't have to mean finger food. Again, this can be a spoon, this can be mashed foods, but they're ready to do it.
People think it skips purees entirely or mashes entirely to go to finger food. It mostly just skips the idea of baby food. So foods that are naturally pureed and mashed, or foods that an adult would eat as a mash, are very prominent in baby-led weaning if you see how people are actually doing it. So there's not a skipping of mashes and purees necessarily, or even spoons and spoon feeding, as long as you're following baby's lead and you're tending to choose foods that are part of the family diet.
Yeah, I think we have to remember as parents that eating is a skill. It's like crawling and walking. How do you get good at a skill? You have to keep practicing. I think a lot of times Indian cultures were very focused on this volume driven mentality that the kids have to finish 120 ml of the lentils and rice every day. And I think we forget that our kids are humans. Their appetite will not be linear. And I think when it comes to baby-led weaning, as you were saying, that a lot of us get nervous because we feel we cannot offer the spoon and we cannot offer purees as well. So that whole idea of only finger foods is something that is very daunting. So what you're saying is that you can offer food in mash form and you can use the spoon in baby-led weaning, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The goal here is just to let your baby lead the way. So whether you're doing a spoonful of lentils or you're doing a big piece of lamb, your baby can still hold that spoon, or they can even lean in and open their mouth and accept the spoon from you. But it's that dance of communication of your baby saying, hey, I'm ready for this. I'm interested. Let's do it. As opposed to I'm going to airplane the food in and get it into your mouth in any way possible.
There's also the developmental readiness piece. So we tended before to lean towards an age-based time for starting solids. So your baby is ready to start at 6 months or at 4 months, or a certain specific time, when the reality is baby is ready to start solids when they show a constellation of skills. And we can get into what those skills are, but even aside from that, the concept of baby-led weaning is very much dependent on those skills being developed and the idea that baby is ready for a variety of foods when those skills are in place. So again, they're not only ready for purees, and the purees then have to be increased slowly in texture. They're ready for finger foods. They're ready for resistive foods. They're ready for soft foods. They're ready for lumpy foods. There's a lot of things that they can do when they show those developmental readiness signs that extend beyond simply spoon feeding and purees. So it's meeting the baby where they're at developmentally and recognizing that those foods have value early on in the baby's feeding journey. They're not things that they have to work to over time necessarily.
Yeah. And I think so many parents, when they start solids, they're like, okay, we'll start with purees, but they can't do finger foods yet. We need to wait a few weeks, right? And exactly as you said, it's not that you have to wait. Once they show these signs of readiness, they're able to handle a variety of textures. And I think the sooner you do it, the more practice they get, the better they get at chewing. So if you could clarify for us, what are those signs of readiness we need to look for?
Absolutely. So there are 3 main signs of readiness that we're looking for, and babies typically show these signs around 6 months. Now, is there a baby that shows it at 4 months? Maybe. Are there 5-month-olds that show these skills? Absolutely. My second daughter was ready at 5 months, definitely. But most babies around 6 months are showing these skills. The 3 things that we're looking for is we want them to be able to sit with a little bit of help. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect sitting. They sit down on the floor and you go off and do the laundry and they don't tumble over. But if you're holding them on your lap or if they're sitting in their high chair, can they keep their body upright for 10 or 15 minutes, the length of time that you would expect a meal to take? The next thing we want to see is we want to be able to see them actually use their hands when they're sitting. So a lot of times you can put a 4-month-old in a high chair and they can kind of like, push themselves into sitting and they can stay there. But the second they try to use their arms, they just completely tumble over because they just don't have enough flexibility in their movement that they can do both things at once. So we want to see them be able to not only sit, but be able to grab something off of the tray or something from in front of them and bring that to their mouth. Then the next thing we want to look for is interest. Now, if your 4-month-old comes to the table, a lot of times you'll see them maybe, look around for a few minutes, but they'll probably fall asleep or want to nurse or get fussy. They really aren't that engaged. But when you bring your 6-month baby to the table, they are like, what are you doing? I want to put that in my mouth. That looks like a fun toy. And you can see their eyes following the food and following the spoons and watching what everyone's doing because it looks fun. They're cognitively interested in what's going on at the table. And that helps our babies actually engage with the eating process, open their mouth, choose to accept the food, which is so important for developing that really positive back and forth relationship with the baby and their caregiver. So being able to sit with a little bit of help, being able to use their hands when they're sitting, and then that interest in food and meal times and what's going on around them. And typically we see this around 6 months. It's also completely okay if they're closer to 7 months. It happens sometimes. Every baby moves on their own timeline.
Can I add? Yeah, just you had said prior to Kim answering about how baby is ready for those foods and that it is helpful to introduce them early, but a lot of parents are nervous. And I wanted to just add on that the beautiful thing is that at around 6 months, when baby has all of those skills, they are at their peak of having protective mechanisms that help to keep them safe as they explore foods. So a lot of parents believe baby will get safer over time. But the reality is their oral motor skills, even though they are very brand new to chewable food, are built on reflexes that are really powerful at around 6 months. And baby has slightly different anatomy in their mouth and in their throat than an adult has. And they have anatomy that slowly starts to change from around newborn through 12 months. And so around 12 months, it's really starting to stretch out and to move towards what you see in adulthood. But a 6-month-old baby has a lot of protective mechanisms that keep them safe as they explore food that will actually start to fade out to a certain extent over time. They will not go away. It's not like baby suddenly becomes unsafe at 9 months or at 12 months or 18 months. But I like to reassure a very nervous parent that baby isn't getting safer over time by waiting. It's actually an ideal time to start solids around 6 months because baby has such strong protective mechanisms.
And Sanchita, like you said, it's a skill they're learning and practicing. So the more practice they get, the better they're going to be at it.
Right, right. Yeah, because the main thing that I get is that parents are worried about, they learn, okay, for baby-led weaning, it needs to be stick shape. You need to pass that squish test. We all know that, but they're still like, oh my God, what if my baby takes a big bite? What am I going to do? I don't know how to handle it. So we know the basics of it, but parents are still nervous that what's going to happen when that big bite happens. And I've seen that video. I know Kary had sent one video, and I send that reference to my clients of what to do when a big bite happens. But could you please clarify for us why we shouldn't be worried when a baby takes a big bite, and what should we do to protect them?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start just by saying that this is probably why we created Solid Starts, or why Jenny and Kim and I wanted to get this information out in this way, because so many parents are like, yeah, that sounds good, but what about when they actually take a big bite? I'm terrified. I don't think this is a good idea. I'm not sure I can do it. Let's go back to the spoon, or let's go back to purees entirely. So it's a really common concern that parents have. It's normal to worry that your baby, something bad might happen to your baby, and you want to keep them safe. But when baby holds the food themselves and puts it in their own mouth, and that step is important. We don't want to put food in baby's mouth. The research actually indicates that that can increase the risk. But when baby sees the food, reaches out, grabs the food, touches the food, and puts it in their mouth, there's a lot of preparation that is happening in the brain to manage that food. And then when that food gets in the mouth, that triggers baby's reflexes, the ones I was talking about a minute ago that help them stay safe. It also triggers the reflexes that they naturally have that help them learn to chew. So that food starts triggering those reflexes, which actually makes it likely that they will break off a piece or bite off a piece. And we want that to happen. I think parents parents think that's an accidental part of this, or that that's a bad thing that happened, when in reality, that's good. That tells you baby's on the right track and they're doing the right things. When that food is in baby's mouth, it will continue to trigger baby's chewing reflexes. So it starts to get the jaw moving up and down to help mash that food. It keeps the tongue moving to mash that food and to move that food around the mouth. As baby is doing that, they have strong protective mechanisms in place to help keep that food in their mouth. So babies actually have a really hard time moving the food back to try and swallow it at first because of those protective mechanisms. So the tongue has a really powerful forward movement, not so much a lifting and backwards movement or a side to side movement at first. So it wants to keep that food forward. The mouth is really small in an infant with a lot of brown fat. So there's not areas or pockets where food can get stuck like there is in a toddler or an adult. They tend to have a very tightly packed mouth, which again makes it hard for that food to be pushed back towards the throat because it wants to stay in that front part of the mouth. Then babies have a very strong gag reflex that tends to live further forward in the mouth than it does in a toddler or in an adult. So where you and I won't gag until something touches pretty far back on our tongue, so the posterior third of our tongue, an infant who's just getting started with solids tends to gag when something touches about the middle part of their tongue or even a little in front of that. So the food can't get very far back before baby's strong gag reflex kicks in, which naturally closes the airway and gets the pharynx squeezing top to bottom to push anything that might be back there up and out. And really, most of the time, the food is in baby's mouth. So then it starts pushing the tongue forward and pushing anything that's in the mouth out of the mouth. So baby's naturally moving their tongue forward to push it out of their mouth. And the gag reflex helps to get anything else that might be in there that is not well chewed, that moves even a little bit further back in the mouth, back out. On top of that, baby has other protective mechanisms. So if the food should get a little further back, they have a cough response. They have a very strong swallow response. So babies, if food or anything should get even further back, which again is very challenging to do and pretty rare, the body naturally will attempt to swallow it. And we have a very stretchy esophagus, food tube, so that when baby does attempt to swallow it, even if the piece is not well chewed or is bigger, it tends to go right down into the stomach. So that's not inherently unsafe. There's nothing wrong with baby doing that as a final step of protection should something get further back. So again, not a dangerous situation when baby bites off food. And in fact, it tends to help them learn to spit food back out. And Kim and I call spitting a life-saving skill for that reason.
And you just mentioned it at the end, but there's a misunderstanding too that big food is what we choke on. There's this idea that the bigger the piece of food, the worse it is, or the bigger the bite, the scarier it is. And in reality, when we think about what's going on in our throat, it's actually the opposite. There's a difference between the breathing tube, or where the air comes through, and the food tube where the food goes down. When we're thinking about true choking, that's scary, that, is a life-threatening emergency, we're thinking about that breathing tube being blocked. And that breathing tube's actually pretty darn small. Even in an adult, it's not that big. But in a baby, we're thinking about the size of a drinking straw or a standard pen or pencil. It's a very skinny little tube, and it's pretty firm. It's a rigid tube. So unlike the food tube that Kary was talking about that can squeeze food down and is really stretchy and flexible, that little tube in the front is what we want to make sure we don't get food into. So if you're picturing the size of a drinking straw, something that's going to plug that is going to be small, firm, round, or maybe tapered and pointy on the end. It's maybe compressible like a marshmallow because that could kind of get stuck in there. It's slippery. A big piece of food that they've taken a bite of is going to have a really, really challenging time blocking that tiny little skinny tube. So those bigger pieces of food are much more likely just going to get swallowed. And while that might not be comfortable, so to say, we've all swallowed a piece of food that wasn't chewed well, right? I know I have. It's not something we need to worry about our babies being unsafe with. The thing that is more worrisome is the marble, the whole peanut that the baby accidentally inhales, or they take a deep breath and it gets sucked into their breathing tube, and then their breathing is blocked and they can't.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that babies actually have more of a chance on choking on non-food objects than actually food objects. From what I'm understanding here, if you're a parent who's starting finger foods, number one, let your baby handle it, because their mouth has all these mechanisms that can handle the food. So don't put your finger in the mouth. It can actually push the food further back. And if you're starting solids, make sure your baby's upright, make sure they're putting the food in the mouth themselves, and of course, offer them a safe finger food. So we're not going to be offering them choking hazards in the form of like anything round, hard, sticky. So once you take all of these things into account, it's quite amazing to see how a baby can handle it themselves. So it's so nice to hear that the body is really prepped to make sure that they can enjoy. So a lot of times parents see this, the baby bites a piece off and then they'll spit it out. So are babies able to chew and swallow then right away, or is this something that they will build up during time? Because so many times parents tell me, okay, I've given my baby the finger food, but she'll bite, she'll spit, bite and spit. She's not taking anything in. So at what point of baby-led weaning do they actually start eating and swallowing?
I think it very much depends. Every kid develops these skills in a little bit of a different timeline. So the biting and spitting is natural, like Kary had said, because they don't really know exactly what to do with it yet, but they learn what to do through trial and error. So first we see some spitting, then sometimes we see them kind of hold it in the front of their mouth and not be so sure what to do with it. And eventually their tongue figures out, oh, if I push this to the side, I can actually break it down. Generally speaking, a lot of babies after a couple months of practice will figure this out. Are there some babies that continue to spit well through infancy? I think Kary's first daughter was a spitter until she was 15 or 16 months old, but then it clicked and now she's an incredible eater. Every baby has these things click at a different time, and that's completely normal, but the more practice they get, the better they're going to be at it. We can't make them make their tongue move the food around. Easy to say, well, they're not eating this, but they're eating from the spoon. But if you think about it, what they're doing from the spoon is the exact same skill that they use to breastfeed or bottle feed, or pretty similar of a skill. For the breast and the bottle, they're sucking the milk in and they're swallowing it. And from the spoon, they're essentially closing their lips and sucking the puree and swallowing it. So it's really not very much of a challenge. They're not learning anything new. The chewable foods are completely different tongue movements than they've ever had to do before. So it just takes time for them to figure it out. It's kind of like the training wheels to their bike, right? They're figuring it out, making mistakes, and eventually the tongue does what it's supposed to do. And they're like, I actually know what to do with this. I can manage it.
And there's the opposite of that we hear as well. Families that are like, my baby got it immediately. Then they never looked back. They wanted more and more. They were excited. They liked it. It tasted good. They wanted to fill their belly. The only thing that I like to mention when parents say that, because it's great, that's wonderful that your baby, it clicked for them very quickly, is that breast milk and formula are a complete source of nutrition for your baby through that first year. And we don't want to replace that too soon, because chewing skills are dependent on the foods that we give. So if your baby is just very quick to pick this up with soft, squishable, mashed foods, that doesn't mean that they're ready for broccoli or they're ready for steak or they're ready for something that's going to require a lot more chewing skills. They are ready to start exploring those foods, but the reality is they're probably not going to be as successful with those foods right off the bat as they were with the banana or the avocado or the squash or the very soft food that you've been giving them. So I wouldn't want baby to get so dependent on those softer foods or mashed foods or spoon feeding that they're decreasing the amount of breast milk or formula they're taking in, so that when you start introducing these more challenging foods, now they don't want to do it because they're hungry and they're hard. And you're also in a predicament where baby is not getting in enough because they are not taking in as much breast and bottle feeds, and they're now not super successful at the table. So that's another reason why we like to introduce a constellation of foods pretty early on, so that baby is now practicing with some that are more challenging and that might not fill their belly, so that they have to have a good breast and bottle feed right after the table meal. And some foods that maybe they are really successful with right at first, like those mashes or those purees or those very soft finger foods, where they start learning, oh, this can actually get into my belly and feel good, but they're slowly building those skills and they're not dropping quickly their breast and bottle feeds.
Yeah, so many parents, I have to remind them that milk is the primary source of nutrition in the first year, and don't worry about the quantity. So I think for us as younger or modern parents, we're understanding that. But in Indian families, a lot of us, we live in joint families. So you have the grandparents and all who are still a little bit in this volume driven culture. So I have so many parents that are like, we want to do baby led weaning, and our baby's picking up the food and biting and spitting and having a blast, honestly. But then everyone comes and says, you're starving your child. What's wrong with you? How can you do this? So what advice would you give to those parents who really want to do it, but they're struggling with all the noise around?
Yeah, I think it is hard when you're doing something that somebody else you love tells you isn't safe for baby or is making your baby uncomfortable. So I think having those conversations is really important, and helping them understand that research changes over time, and that what we know is that the formula of, even 50 years ago wasn't as robust and nutritionally complete as the formula of today. And we also had a lot of misunderstanding about breast milk and what breast milk could do and should do for your baby that has now been disproven, or new research has come out to show how important breast milk is over that first year of life. So we really know some different things than we knew 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago. It's not unreasonable that your parents or even your grandparents would have a different understanding of how babies should eat than you have. Talking them through some of this, that the research has changed a little bit, recommendations have changed a little bit, not that they're not wrong. They're accurate for information that came out at that point, but we now know lots of different things that show us a different way to feed baby, and really helping them understand that breast milk and formula remain extremely important for a baby, not just for the first 6 months of life, but for those second 6 months of life as well. And potentially beyond that, breastfeeding and breast milk can remain incredibly important for a toddler's diet as well. But that those first 12 months of life, it is the primary source of nutrition. So even if baby does not take in a single bite at the table, they have that breast milk and that formula as their safety net to make sure their belly is full. And the research shows us that there's a common misconception that if baby eats more at the table, they're going to sleep better at night. The research has debunked that as a myth. So that's not really an accurate bit of information that oftentimes parents hear. So there's not a lot of reason, again, to be chasing finger foods at the table. There's a lot more evidence that we should be following baby's lead and let them eat at their own pace, relying on breast milk and formula for as long as they need it through that first 12 months of life. And again, beyond. My daughter was closer to 15 months before it really clicked for her. So she was getting pretty much entirely breast milk through that first 15 months of life. And then finally that skill set clicked for her, and she recognized how to chew the food, how to swallow it, and that it felt really good in the belly. So we could start reducing the breast milk and helping her increase table foods.
This might be because I'm just deep in the realm of toddler and preschool parenting right now with my own kids, but it immediately makes me think of two things: of just that these, your parents, your in-laws, whoever, they love your baby, right? And they're worried that you're not feeding them enough, and that's them showing their love. And so the immediate thing that comes to mind is validating them. I know you love my daughter, Maeve. I know you love Maeve so much, and you want to make sure that Maeve gets all the food she needs. And it's important to you that you're showing your love through making sure she gets that food. And then asking the question of, why do you think she's still hungry? Or what is she doing that makes you think that she's not getting enough food? Or what are you worried that she's not growing enough? Kind of asking those questions. And while I know there are so many grandparents out there that are just going to be, I don't care, you're wrong, I know better than you. We've all been in those situations. I do think that as the modern parents that we are, like you're saying, it can help to ask the question and try to flip it back on them. I see that you're really trying to love my daughter, and I can see that you're worried that she's not eating enough. Can you tell me what you're seeing that makes you so worried that she's not gaining weight? Or what is it that you're really worried about? Can't promise that's going to change their mind, but at least it opens the conversation.
Yeah, you reminded me of something that I think is important, but just like, I think there is, especially when you're breastfeeding, a sense amongst a partner and the rest of the family that they don't have a good role, that they're not able to help with those things. But when it comes to the table, there's this transfer of support. So now suddenly they can have a really active role. It can be hard to give that up, or to accept that that's not maybe as front and center yet as you want it to be. So I think a lot of times grandparents are just really excited to have this important feeding, nourishing role for this baby that they love so much, but they haven't maybe necessarily been able to take a front and center role with feeding yet. So reassuring them that the work that they're doing at the table to help feed the baby, to prepare the food, to bring it to the table, even eating with baby and showing them how to eat is so valuable. It has immense value for baby, even if baby is not yet swallowing the food, and that they are doing so much for baby by following their lead and waiting rather than pushing them, because that baby has so much more internal motivation to eat that food in time if you give them the chance to explore it at their own pace and build those skills at the pace that is right for them, rather than trying to push them to eat more than they are able to or than they want right at first.
Yeah, and even as adults, so many of us struggle now with overeating and having issues with food. And so much of it is stemming back to our relationship with food as kids, because we were forced to finish our food. And it's so beautiful to see when we let our kids lead. As they get older, they figure out what their body needs, what their likes are, what their preferences are. And so many of times parents will come and say, oh, my baby doesn't like this food or loves this. I said, that's amazing. They're figuring out what their body needs instead of us trying to dictate and put that on them. I want to ask about, for parents from 6 to 12 months, I think we're switching our mindset to be like, okay, a good mealtime is not that our child finished the bowl. A good mealtime is that our child touched the food, picked it up, tried to chew, spit it out. Parents struggle with that. So could you guide us on how do we know if our child has actually got enough or it was a successful mealtime before 1 year of age? What would we want to look out for?
I feel like that's two separate questions, right? Knowing it's a successful mealtime, you kind of already hit the nail on the head. It's just the baby showed up at the table and they had a little bit of fun because they're learning skills, and babies learn through trying, they learn through play. And so if they're sitting at the table and they're engaging with the food, whether that's 1 minute, 5 minutes, or heck, 35 minutes, that meal is a win. They've learned something. And even if they got and you had to pick them up and put them on your lap while, for part of the meal, that's still a win. They're learning about the table. They're learning about family meal times. They're smelling food. They're touching food. They might be tasting it, might be practicing, but it's all about figuring out how to be at the meal and how to manage that food. I think that we forget too that everything is brand new for your baby. So just the fact that they're sitting and using all of those muscles to sit in their chair, they're using all of their sensory systems to process this whole overwhelming environment where there's colors and flavors and smells and all kinds of new stuff. And we're asking them to practice a brand new hard thing too. So we're asking a lot of them. So if they hang out at the table for a few minutes and engage, that's a win.
Yeah, I want to add on to that just to help put it into context. Like if you really wanted your child to play soccer eventually, it's not just a success if they come to the field and kick a goal. It's successful at first that they come to the field. It's successful at first that they just sit on the sidelines with you and watch other people play soccer. There's a lot of value to that piece of it to help them understand, oh, this is a game that we play. This is how it works, to get the lay of the land. And then in time to start participating. And that might just look at first like running around, never kick the ball at all. And then they kick the ball, but they miss it, or they kick it in the wrong direction. But each of those experiences builds on the last to help them understand how this works. So if you want your 10-year-old to get on the soccer team and to get out there and do well, that usually starts much further back than that with all of those small steps that got them there over time. The exact same thing applies at the table. At first, just coming to the table and watching the other adults eat is valuable. So it's a successful meal, like you mentioned, Sanchita, like Kim mentioned, that they're just sitting there and watching. And then they're touching the food and smashing it, and nothing got in their mouth, but it all got in their hair. That's a successful meal because they're learning how this food feels in their hand, which helps them understand how it might feel in their mouth. And it helps them get used to the smell of the food and the feel of the food. All of that builds in time so that, again, eventually they get to that goal moment where they put the food in their mouth, they chew it and they eat it, and they turn to grandma and they hug her and say, thank you for the meal. But that's not where you start. It takes a lot of time to get there.
And when you're talking about offering our kids food and how it takes time and practice and all of that, so I know that we've debunked this whole thing. We used to say 3 days per food, like apple for 3 days, banana for 3 days. And we know that more variety, the better for them. But like if we have a baby who's sitting down with the apple and the first day they're touching it, they're feeling it, they're getting a bit comfortable, do you still feel that then we should offer apple again the next day? Or is it okay to offer the variety and then get back to apple next week in terms of them feeling safe and familiar around foods?
It's perfectly fine to jump to a new food next day. You absolutely do not have to stick with the same food day after day. We know that babies and all people build interest and build enjoyment of foods over time through exposure to those foods, positive exposures to those foods. It is important that we don't introduce a food once and then never bring it back again. We want to keep those foods in the diet regularly after we introduce them, which is why I had a parent a while back say, I want to get to 1,000 food in those first 6 months. And I was like, well, that's great, but that's not exactly the point. If your family is regularly eating 1,000 foods, great. Get through those flavors and keep bringing them back. Especially, I think we think of individual foods. I'm going to introduce mango. I'm going to introduce broccoli. I'm going to introduce lentils. But the reality is pretty quickly you start layering foods. So even the dal is going to have multiple spices in it and foods in one dish. So it starts to get a little easier. But again, we're not necessarily needing to get to 1,000 foods. We're needing to get to the foods and flavors that the family regularly eats. And then we want to keep those in the diet again and again and again, because food is very malleable and dynamic. So the dal that you cook today is going to feel, smell, and taste a little different than the dal you cook tomorrow, or even than that same dal reheated tomorrow. And with one bite of that food to the next, you might get more lumps, less lumps, more flavor. Like there's always change that is happening as the meal progresses and within that food. So it's really important that the baby is exposed to that food again and again and again, so that they learn that they need to adapt to what they're experiencing in the moment. So again, we don't necessarily need to stick with that food on any sort of regimen. So 3 days in a row, it's not necessary. There's no research to support that. But we do know that we want to keep those foods in the diet regularly. And this is especially important for the common allergens. And maybe, Kim, you want to talk to that?
Sure. That 3-day rule initially kind of stumped all of us. We're like, where did this come from? Did this come from the allergy literature? And Kary and I actually reached out to one of the allergists that we were working with 15 years ago before we knew Dr. Bajwala, who's on our team now. And his response was, I don't know what that is. That has nothing to do with allergies. He was kind of confused as to where that came from. But when it comes to the common allergens, what we know now is that you do want to introduce them early, and you do want to expose them more than one day in a row just to let their body, to make sure that they don't have a reaction. So our allergist recommends a 3-day introduction schedule. So you start with a small amount of, say, mashed scrambled egg. The second day, you'll do a little bit more. So you can go from 1/4 of a teaspoon to 1/2 of a teaspoon. And then on day 3, you can do a full teaspoon. And she does recommend that you do 3 back-to-back days for those common allergens for introduction. Now, the key here that we know from the research for preventing allergies is that not only do you introduce it early, but you keep it in your babies regularly through age 5. The research says 2 to 3 times a week. I have not met very many parents that have been able to keep all of the common allergens in their baby's diet 2 to 3 times a week up until age 5. I can tell you it definitely hasn't happened in my house with my kids. But that's the ideal. And the idea is just try to keep those common allergens after they've been introduced safely in your baby's diet as often as possible to keep their body exposed to those allergenic proteins. So the 9 common allergens, and I'll start with the 3 most important, and let's see if I can get them all in one take care. But egg, peanut, and dairy are the first 3 most important that you want to do early. So once baby's showing signs of readiness, you want to introduce them. And maybe after this, Kary, remember to circle back to the reasons you might want to start earlier. Egg, peanut, and dairy. After that, we have soy, sesame, wheat, shellfish, finned fish. What am I missing? Tree nuts.
Tree nuts. Yeah.
Yes. So we do want to introduce those all 9 of those common allergens within that first year. Now, our allergist does say that if shellfish specifically is not in your regular family diet, it's one of those ones that it's okay to hold off on. She is shared that the research tells us that shellfish allergies are actually more common to develop when you're a little bit older anyway. So shellfish is not something that you have in your diet regularly. And it's also more challenging to prepare shellfish in a safe way for a young baby because it's very chewy. It just needs a lot of modification. It's okay to put that one on the back burner and focus on the ones, especially egg, peanut, and dairy, and then the foods that are in our regular everyday diet.
And then to loop back to what Kim said a moment ago, there are a subset of babies who have high risk for developing later food allergies. And we used to think that was babies whose parents had food allergies. There were a lot of different things that people suspected created high risk for developing food allergies, but the strongest research currently shows that it's pretty much just babies that have severe eczema. So if your baby, your young baby, has severe eczema, or if your baby has a confirmed allergy to another food, those are the two things, they're considered high risk for developing more food allergy or for developing a food allergy. If your baby falls in that bucket, there is good research to suggest that the common allergens should be introduced as early as 4 months old in a very specific sort of way, which we talk about in our book, which you can find in our app. We have lots of recommendations on how to do this safely with a 4-month-old who's not exactly showing those classic developmental readiness signs for starting solids. So it wouldn't mean that we wanted to start all solids at 4 months, but just that those common allergens could and probably should be introduced a little bit earlier to help baby avoid developing a later food allergy to those foods, because again, they fall into that high risk bucket.
So even if you are a parent who has allergies or you feel that your child is high risk with eczema or so, the main point is that it doesn't mean you should not introduce the allergens. The fact is that you should introduce it. And of course, if you are nervous, I always tell some of my clients actually go to the doctor's office and do it there. I'm like, whatever makes you happy, or they keep an antihistamine at home. But the point is, introduce it early. And the point is, all of these foods are very nutritious. We want our kids to be having fish and egg and nuts and all of that. And for Indian foods, right, we use a lot of spices. So a lot of times when they're introducing lentils to the baby for the first time, maybe at, 6.5 months or so, they do it. I get these messages, can I add the coriander powder and the black pepper and the turmeric? And isn't it too much for my baby to handle? So for all those Indian parents out there, I'd love for you to clarify, can we add all those spices in the food at one go and offer it to our baby?
I mean, there's no reason not to. You definitely can. Know that if it is a very strong flavor, your baby may be a little bit surprised at first. It's a brand new experience for them. So a lot of times we tell families to go slowly, maybe introduce one flavor at a time. But what we also know is that 6 to 8 month, 9-month window is the time where your baby is the most open to learning about these flavors and accepting them. And the more they accept them early on, the more likely they're going to continue to accept them into toddlerhood and childhood. So the flavors that your family loves, go for it. Absolutely go for it. Enjoy them, share them with your baby, and just be careful with the really heavy spice or the things that might just be a little overwhelming at first.
Yeah, we like to just sort of separate out the things that are spicy, so that have heat to them. So adding cayenne or the black pepper or something that will add a level of heat, we recommend low and slow for those. Babies can absolutely have those flavors. They can absolutely get used to those flavors. And starting low and building up can sort of completely surprise parents at how quickly baby can get used to that feeling and really enjoy it. So starting low and slow with those flavors is one way to get them used to them. Also pairing those strong, spicier, hotter flavors with something cooling. So serving those lentils with some yogurt or a bit of fruit on the side, or having a cup nearby with a little bit of water, can all help partner with that so a baby is not overwhelmed by the heat. Kim and I love to coach babies. So parents often are like, well, baby doesn't understand this. We know that they don't understand the words at first. They will in time, actually much faster than you even realize it if you're using the words, but letting them know, oh, this is hot. It's warm in my mouth. I'm going to take a bite of my yogurt. Again, baby does not understand the words, but they understand that you're telling them something important. They understand that you're staying calm. They understand that what the actions that you're doing, that you're picking up the yogurt and you're eating it, and they slowly start to learn that those things go together. So helping your baby understand that piece of it can be important too. And then when it comes to just the spices, so like you were saying, adding in coriander, adding in paprika or turmeric, all of those things that don't have a heat, I would say go for it. Again, we want baby to get used to the flavors that you are eating. And Kim and I have worked with so many babies over the years. We've heard so many stories of parents describing things that baby put in their mouth or that they found in babies' mouths. And I say this only because it highlights how 6 to 12-month-olds, really 6 to 15-month-olds usually, will put just about anything in their mouth, including things that are repulsive to us, that we think should not go in baby's mouth and that would taste absolutely disgusting. Babies don't yet have a strong disgust response. So they may make a surprised face, like Kim said. They may shiver, they may spit the food out or push the food away, but then they usually go back for it and try again. Those exposures to those really big flavors, even garlic and onions, raw onion, things that you might think are too much for a young baby, are often much better accepted than we realize. And then as baby gets used to that flavor, it tends to grow on them in time so that they prefer those flavors and go back to those flavors again and again.
Yeah, Kary and her sister's friends had a competition once of what the most disgusting thing was that they had pulled out of their baby's mouth. Wasn't it like a cigarette butt or a beetle or something?
Oh my God.
It's awful.
I mean, these are things that like just the baby had accidentally somehow come upon in the environment. But Band-Aids and the shoes and the dog toys and again, like bugs and things that, you don't want to end up in baby's mouth, but that somehow did. And you recognize that babies will put just about anything in their mouth. So if they can tolerate munching on a garden leaf, they can probably tolerate exposures to the delicious foods and flavors that you're serving.
I'm talking about the random things that they put in their mouth, and this is something you somewhat mentioned earlier, but this is just an important plug. Once your baby starts solids, spend time on the floor of your house, making sure that you've picked up the small little toys and the little things that your baby could potentially put in their mouth and would serve as a choking hazard. So it's a great time to do things like check your door stops, like the little rubber on the end of your door stop is a perfect choking hazard size thing that your baby can pick up off the floor. Marbles from your older child playing, wrappers from your toddlers opening up their snacks, just things that are on the floor that your baby will most likely pick up and put in their mouth when they're crawling around that are not safe things for them to have. Button batteries, our gastroenterologist is, that's like her number one thing that she gets the most worried about. But just one of those like keep your baby safe tips is make sure that the non-food choking hazards that you can control, so things that are on the floor, on the table, are cleaned up and away from baby to keep them safe.
I think just back to the lentils part, I just want to ask you the question about this is because I think a lot of parents are worried that, we're putting too many spices. If baby has a reaction, we will not know what caused it. But from my understanding, maybe you can clarify, as long as it's not one of the top 9 allergens, it's a very low chance that they'll actually respond to a certain spice or so. Like I've had a few babies who've had like a reaction to like an avocado or something, but that's like 1 in 100. So I think their main worry is that if there's a reaction, we will not know what caused it.
Most allergic reactions will happen with those 9 allergenic foods. Is it possible for a baby to be allergic to anything? Yes, it technically is, but the vast majority of allergies are with those top 9 allergens. Now, something especially with things like spice that we notice are skin reactions. So if you get a whole bunch of coriander on your face, your skin or baby's skin might not be so happy about it. And they may get a little bit of a redness on their face. I had a baby once take a lemon and just like completely go whole hog on their face with the lemon. And of course, her skin was not so happy after that. So a little bit of a contact rash is can be very normal after eating a wide variety of foods, especially things that are a little bit acidic, like tomatoes, lemons, etc. The one thing to think about, since you mentioned avocado and we didn't touch on this, is FPIES, which is a only, I don't know how many years, but it's only recently been more publicized and better understood by the allergy community. And FPIES is a delayed allergic reaction. So unlike the ones that you're thinking about, like with swelling and rashes and breathing challenges that happen with like a peanut allergy. So FPIES is a delayed food allergy that presents an hours after eating the food, and it shows up with GI related issues. So things like vomiting and diarrhea. The concern with FPIES is that if it's a very severe reaction, your baby can throw up or have so much diarrhea that they get dehydrated. Now, FPIES is quite rare, but it is a diagnosis that we are seeing babies have. And there are certain foods that are more likely to trigger FPIES. So, Kary, you probably know these better off the top of your head, but avocado is one of them. Sweet potato is another. Eggs can be a common FPIES trigger. Wheat. These are outlined in our book and on our website. And you can obviously talk to your pediatrician or your allergist about this too. But if you notice that you're offering a certain food and then a couple hours later, your baby's always throwing up or they're always having diarrhea, that's definitely something you want to chat with your doctor about.
And just to reiterate, Kim, you already said this, but FPIES is very rare. So this is not the common thing. And Sanchita, you also mentioned this, like parents often worry that baby is having a reaction because they're fussy or they're gassy later, or they have a little bit of a skin rash. Those reactions are common, and we don't necessarily need to always pinpoint them to a certain food. Baby's digestive system is just getting used to digesting new things. So they might be a little bit fussy. Also, 6 to 12-month-old babies can just be fussy because they're learning new skills and they're frustrated at the limitations of their body, or they can't quite communicate yet. There are lots of reasons why babies might be more fussy. They also tend to be going through a sleep progression or sleep changes around 6, 7 months old, and then again around 9 months old. So you often hear parents say, I think it's the food. I think there's a food that's bothering them and they're waking up more at night. And then they start chasing that thread. Is it this food? Is it that food? Start pulling foods out of baby's diet unnecessarily. So we have to accept that there probably will be some amount of response. Baby, again, their stomach is learning to tolerate these foods. But if baby's not vomiting, if baby isn't swelling or having a severe actual allergic reaction, it's not necessarily something where you need to chase down the food. Although, again, it's worth potentially keeping an eye on it and noting, actually, every time they have doll, they get this rash, or every time they eat this food, they seem really fussy in the afternoon. So let's isolate that food. What's in it? Let's start looking at the different ingredients. Maybe it's the garlic in the food. Maybe it is the coriander in the food. Maybe it's the turmeric. Maybe it's the lentils themselves, and trying to figure out what part of that is causing the issue that you're seeing in baby. And if pulling that piece out for a bit helps baby, great. Pull that ingredient out of that food for a bit for baby, and then reintroduce it, because baby's digestive system is maturing all the time and their ability to tolerate certain things is maturing all the time. We don't want to pull that food out indefinitely.
Okay. For the last few minutes, I'm going to give you 2-3 situations that a lot of babies go through, and I just love to hear some tips on that. So the first situation is, I get so many babies, they're putting everything in their mouth, right? So parents are like, this baby's gonna shove everything in their mouth and eat everything. They put them on the high chair and the baby will refuse to put the spoon in their mouth, even though they've been putting it in their mouth on the floor. And what they do is they will turn the spoon around and gnaw on the other side. But when it comes to the side with the puree, they will not put it in their mouth. Is this common? Is this normal? How can we help those parents struggling with that?
That is normal. That is not common. Most babies are very motivated to try new flavors and put those things in their mouth, but it does happen. That's not an isolated thing. I've seen that. Kim has seen that many times in our career. Typically, when that happens, it's because baby's not quite ready. And so they're going to get there in a couple days, or it tells me somebody's been pressuring that baby. So baby didn't do it at first, and then somebody tried to just sneak in a bite and then push them a little bit. And really trying to coerce or cajole baby into putting that food in their mouth, which is totally reasonable why parents or grandparents want to do that. But it tends to lead to even more resistance and refusal for that food going forward. So backing off is so important. And also modeling is so important. So that's a baby oftentimes who's not sitting at the table while the adults are eating. Oftentimes that's the first step. Just make sure baby's coming to the table with you and let them see everybody else eating, because babies are primed to want to do what they see their trusted adults do. So if they're touching the food and putting it in their mouth, into their own mouth, babies' mirror neurons start to fire and they tend to want to do the exact same things. So that's the first step, getting that pressure out of there. Second step, giving the food on the plate and letting baby go at it at their own time, but expecting that there's probably going to be several meals in a row where they don't touch anything, and that is just fine, also can help improve this. In really severe cases where the baby's very, very resistant, we recommend moving away from the table for a couple of days. So either eating in a new spot, let's say a blanket on the floor, or a different table in a different room or outside. And if it's really an issue where baby's completely opposed at the table, holding baby in your lap or on your hip while you're in the kitchen and walking around with you eating a piece of food or taking bites of food and talking with baby. So you're not offering baby any food. You're just talking to them. Oh, I'm eating this oatmeal and it's delicious. What's that over there? And you're just having this conversation because you want baby to interact with you. You want them to feel safe and you want them to see what you're doing. So you're eating this food and they're right here with you. And if at any point they show interest, they lean in, they open their mouth, they reach out with their hands, you let them. If they don't, you do not offer it. You do not put it in their mouth. You do not try to give them any. The most I would say to do is you could kiss baby's face. So you're now getting that food and flavors really up close to baby's face, but you're not putting it in their mouth at all. In time, like 100% of babies will usually go for the food within a couple of days in that scenario because the pressure is so low and it's fun. And then you can start moving back towards the table.
Yeah, we like to say babies learn by watching us. They learn everything from watching us. So they need to see us do it. And a lot of times too, when it comes to purees and spoons, it's probably uncommon that the parent is sitting across eating the jar of pureed carrots. So they may want to consider offering something that they too want to eat so they can model that behavior back and forth.
Okay. And the last question I have is, there's babies who sit down, they're ready to eat. They'll, pick up the spoon, they'll have one bite and the parent will preload. They'll have one bite of finger food and then they and then they start throwing the food and they're done. So many babies will have 1-2 bites and then they're done with the meal. Does that mean that they are not hungry? Does that mean they did not like the food? Does that mean they didn't like the texture? I think for us, sometimes we're like, can't the babies just tell us what they're going through? But as experts, could you tell us what would that normally indicate?
Typically, that just means they're done. Remember, this is a whole lot of sensory overload for a baby. It's a lot to do. There's a lot of learning going on. And a lot of babies, 2 bites is just all they've got in them at the time. And that's okay. Throwing the food, windshield wiping the food, all the things that they do to make a giant mess typically are just signs that they're just all done. Like Kary had mentioned about holding the baby, if they start throwing the food after a couple bites, you can definitely pick them up, put them on your lap, and continue to eat your meal. A lot of times your baby will kind of get engaged in what's on your plate and maybe eat a little bit more, but it's completely okay if they have 2 bites and show us that they're done. At the beginning of starting solids, they don't even realize that the food is there to make them feel full. It's just something that they're figuring out and learning. It's basically a new toy. And so we don't really care about them being super hungry showing up, and we don't care about them leaving the table feeling super full. We sometimes actually find that these babies that are doing a lot of throwing and are not engaging with the food after a couple bites are actually just too hungry because they show up, they're super hungry. Maybe the parent didn't give them a breast or bottle feed before the meal and they're starving. And they have enough gas in the tank to do a couple bites. And then they're like, this is just too hard and I'm starving and I can't do this anymore. And so if they're just over it because they're over it and they're playful and they want to move on with their day, great. But if they're over it after 2 bites and they seem fussy, you may want to think about making sure they're just not so hungry when they come to the table, so they have the ability to do the hard thing of learning to eat the food.
I just want to add that sometimes it's not that baby is completely done. It's that they don't know what to do next. So they've picked up the food, they've put it in their mouth a couple times, and then they're like, I don't know how to move this. I don't know how to chew this. It tasted okay, but now I'm done. It's important that we give baby the chance to continue to go back to it by showing them different things that they can do with it. So it's just like a toy. They might pick up a toy, do 1 or 2 things with it, and then be like, oh, that's it. I don't know what else this toy does. So they drop it and they move on. But if the parent picks it up and shows them a new thing, oh, we can roll it across the floor, or we can toss it up in the air, or we can roll it down my head, or I can turn it over or put it inside of something. Now you're giving the child ideation. You're helping them understand that there are new things that they can do with this or this food than they initially thought, which can bring the baby's interest back to the item to continue exploring it. So if a baby takes 2 bites and then they're done with it, I might take the food and tap it on the tray. Now the baby's like, oh, well, what? Maybe I'll pick it up and I'll tap it on the tray. And for whatever reason, after they tap it twice, then they're like, maybe I'll try to put it in my mouth again. It's like, it just gets them back interested in that food. Or I might pick up the food and I might mash it really dramatically with my thumb or my finger to show baby, look, I can mash this food. Again, baby oftentimes will imitate you. Or they just watch and now they're suddenly back interested. Oh, this food does something different than I initially thought. I also, as a parent, might consider changing the food by cutting it smaller. So now I'm going to mix it in with something else and be like, are they interested if I cut it smaller and mix it with something else? Or I might go back to the kitchen and get a bigger piece. Will they show interest if the piece is bigger? So I'm helping them see that this can be different and trying to draw their attention back to it. But I think it's really important what Kim said, that it's okay if you think the child is just done and you end the meal, because you have breast milk or formula as the safety net to fill their belly, and you want the experience at the table to be positive. So we don't want to opening up different ideas of what the baby can do with the food is helpful to a certain extent. At a certain point, it starts to feel like pressure to the baby who is like, I'm really done. So you really do have to have a dance with baby where you understand, do they just not understand what more to do with the food? So I'm going to give them some ideas, or are they telling me I am done being here right now and I need to move away from the table? And if that's the case, we don't want to keep coercing them by showing them different things to do. We do want to end the meal and acknowledge, I hear you, you're done.
Yeah, I think in this entire episode, what I've really learned is don't panic as parents. Let your baby lead, offer variety, enjoy the process, and create an environment where they can learn about food and actually build that relationship with food, and just realize that mealtime should not be stressful. It is a part of our life. It is something that, they're going to be doing several times a day. So that foundation is so important. So thank you so much for both of your time. And this is such an enlightening episode. I think parents will feel at ease after watching this. We will put all the resources and links for Solid Starts below. So thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.